Professional sports is the most meritocratic form of profession. The athletes on the field, court, or ice are there because they're the best in the world.
That's the case in most sports, with one glaring exception: racing.
That's a problem, and here's how sim racing can solve it. In most sports, greatness can be achieved by anyone. Basketball only needs a ball and a hoop, baseball needs a smaller ball and a stick, and soccer needs barefoot kids with a ball and a dream. Pele, the greatest soccer player ever, learned the fundamentals by kicking a sock filled with rags down the street as a kid. Conversely, motorsports are prohibitive by nature. Prospective drivers need a car and thousands of dollars for maintenance, repairs, and seat time. Even at the lowest level, racing takes a lot of money to get into. Because of this, motorsports history has likely missed out on oceans of untapped natural talent, simply because the driver couldn't afford to get behind the wheel. Of course, there's no way to prove this, but it is interesting to think about, especially when I imagine myself as that untapped potential, and I beat Michael Schumacher to win the 2005 Formula One Drivers' Championship. That was pretty cool. Good job, me. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, sports. In both racing today and pro sports of yesteryear, the roadblock is monetary, but in different ways. Back then, keeping pro sports unpaid wasn't just for idealistic purposes, but a method of self-preservation as well. Most upper crust athletes flat out didn't want to play with working class people because they smelled like sweat, and that's gross. The rules different sports had about what you had to wear on the field and how you had to conduct yourself out there were designed to keep working people away. But as more and more working class athletes started participating, the argument over whether or not to get paid got bigger and bigger. The concept of amateurism, not getting paid for playing sports, was very important for the upper class because that kept poor people out. Meanwhile, the racing world was in its infancy and taking a slightly different path from the rest of the world of sports. Early racers over in Europe were a collection of champagne exporters, heirs to nobility, and industrialists. So basically, rich guys. Because of the material nature of racing, it requires that you have the money to do it. Not necessarily because the elite wanted to keep the sport exclusive, but to be the fastest, you usually just have to have the most money. There are, of course, examples of underfunded underdogs beating the rich guys, but for the most part, money wins races. Because of this, the transition from amateur players to paid professionals didn't really happen to racing like it did to other sports. The act of being paid to play radically changed the world of sports. No longer did athletes have to come from affluent backgrounds. Now, the best players in the game could truly be the best at the game, and they could come from anywhere. Today, sports can be an avenue out of poverty and allow an individual to make it out of a bad situation on physical ability alone. Don't believe me? Well, ask LeBron James.
There's no pressure. There's no pressure at all.
Love him or hate him, side note, you should probably love him because he's a great guy. James is legitimately one of the greatest to ever play basketball. But as you might know, LeBron didn't have an easy childhood. His mom was only 16 when she had him, and they had to move around all the time. To make things a little more stable, LeBron moved in with youth football coach Frank Walker, who showed LeBron how to play basketball at 9 years old. Honestly, the rest is history. I don't need to tell you how good Bron is. His nickname is literally King James. As I said at the top, racing is different from other professional sports because it takes a lot of dough to get into. There's not that youth league, high school, college to pro pipeline for racing like there is for other sports. So how can racing reach more working class kids who dream of going to the pros? Well, I think sim racing could be the answer. Sure, video games don't make you better at sports. It's not like you can play Madden 19 or NBA 2K19 and get drafted to the pros. Believe me, I've tried. Since the beginning of racing history, especially Formula One, motorsports have been a rich man's game. But sim racing manufacturers like Fanatec are trying to help change that. We talked to Thomas Yakima to find out how.
Up to now, if you want to be a good race driver, then yeah, they have to have money or connections or both. Now with sim racing, the teams, the car companies, they have access to a huge pool of talents and skilled drivers. And to learn consistency and good reaction and all that, it's not that easy. It's much easier to pick one of those skilled sim racers and make them physically fit than getting a sports guy and teaching him racing. So I think that's a big chance, and we will see many more sim races advancing from the virtual sport into the real one.
You don't hear that very often in other sports. Sim racing is unique because what you learn using a force feedback wheel actually helps you in real life. And that's not limited to amateur drivers, pros do it too.
Force feedback used in simulations is actually showing a little bit more than you get in a real car, because the games map sensations which were not existing in real cars to be on the wheel as well. So for example, you can easily feel oversteering, understeering, and that helps you a lot to feel exactly when the tires start slipping. Basically the racing is all about to drive as fast that you're not losing the contact between the tires and the road, right? So if you feel that with a strong force feedback wheel, then you have a real good advantage, because you know you can keep your car always at that limit.
But sim racing wasn't always like this. It's come a pretty long way. The first racing game to be considered a racing simulation by gaming experts is Indianapolis 500, The Simulation. Released in 1989, Indianapolis 500 featured sweet MS-DOS graphics and a rockin' MIDI soundtrack. What set this sim apart from games, though, is that the developers actually wanted the cars to behave and handle like the real thing.
It was some pixels, and you can barely have any idea of what you're doing there. We started with very simple steering wheels, then came force feedback. Now we are at direct drive force feedback wheels with 25 Newton meters, full cockpits, triple screens, motion simulators. So it's getting closer and closer to the real thing.
Thomas wasn't lying. These things might as well be real. Check this thing out. It's the Fanatec CSL Elite McLaren GT3, and it's nuts. It's pretty much exactly what you'd see in a McLaren GT3 car.
When we made contact with McLaren, and they wanted us to make a wheel with them, so they sent us the original CAD files of the steering wheel, and the steering wheel is modeled one-to-one to it. The dimensions, the materials, the button pressure, everything is exactly like the original. And of course the original one is made of fully carbon fiber, which drives the cost quite up a lot. But other than that, yeah, we came up with a replica which is really authentic and gets you absolutely the same feeling.
Racing sims and sim equipment is getting more lifelike than ever before. But what does that mean for all us regular people? Well, with some practice, and I'll be frank, a ton of luck, sim racing could get you behind the wheel of a real race car, and here's proof. Back in 2008, Nissan and Polyphony Digital introduced the Gran Turismo Academy. It was a ranked competition where you went against thousands of players all over the world to get the best lap with a certain car at a certain track. If you finished within the top 20, you got flown out to compete with other racers. And if you got into the final round, you had a chance to race real cars to determine who would win the grand prize, a 100% legit racing contract with Nissan. And this wasn't some lowball pat on the back either. GT Academy's first winner, Lucas Ordonez, raced for Nissan's GT4 team in 2009, then went on to finish second in the LMP2 class at Le Mans in 2011. Lucas was just a guy who loved playing Gran Turismo with the wheel, and he finishes second at the greatest race in the world 3 years later. I'm not lying, man. Sim racing can make that kind of stuff happen. Fanatec has partnered with the FIA. They're basically the highest racing organizing body in the land. Fanatec and the FIA are working together to bring more sim racers into the Formula One fold with the Formula One Esports Series. The first half of the season sees sim drivers from all over the world compete for a spot in the Pro Draft, where real F1 teams choose the drivers they want to represent them in virtual competition. That's pretty rad.
The reason why we are partnering with Formula One is basically that our brand is pretty well known in the sim racing community. So we thought, okay, we want to reach a broader audience, and at the same time, Formula One is high tech. I mean, it's all about the best cutting edge technology out there.
This year's Formula One Esports Series winner was Brendan Lee, a 19-year-old dude from Banbury, Oxfordshire. He had been sim racing since he was 13 years old and got to compete at the Race of Champions after winning last year's Esports Series championship. Brendan had never driven a real car before getting to race in the same venue as racing greats like Peter Solberg and David Coulthard. Did I say that right? Coulthard? How do you pronounce David Coulthard? Coulthard?
Okay, I found this on the web for how do you pronounce David Coulthard.
Sick.
Stories like Lucas Ordonez and Brendan Lee's show that sim racing can be a legitimate starting point for a serious career in racing. Obstacles like a huge initial investment and connections in the sport are no longer relevant if the raw talent is there. I think it's completely plausible that we'll see a Formula One great start their career with a controller in their bedroom in our lifetime. Someone judged solely on their skill behind the wheel and not their pocketbook. Done. We got merch, we got new shirt. I want one. I don't even have one yet, what the hell? We have a lot more new shirts. That's at donutmedia.com. Thanks for watching WheelHouse. We look at the stuff that affects you in the car world every week, so hit that yellow subscribe button right there. If you want to know more about racing games in general, we did an episode about that right here. Check out this episode of Science Garage. Follow me on Instagram at Nolan J. Sykes. Follow Donut at Donut Media. We post a lot of behind the scenes stuff, so check it out. Roast me up, fam. Be nice, I'll see you next time.